Okay, hello. How's the Josh? Not so Joshi, I think. Okay, fine. We'll get to lunch as quickly as we can. Okay. I'm sure a lot of you all have seen reports like this, right? Nearly half of class 8 students can barely read at the second grade level, right? I'm sure you've seen this many a time. And then you see this gap and you think, wow, that's the gap we can measure, right? That's the gap we hear about a fair amount. But what about kids in government homes, kids in orphanages, shelter homes, community centers? There's a gap there that we perhaps don't really talk about too much, right? That gap, that's this gap of an ecosystem that's around them, right? We hear this term, it takes a village to raise a child. Very similarly, right? That sort of ecosystem. And that's where we exist. We exist to provide more than just academic support. Hi, my name is Kiran, and I work for UNI. I lead strategy here at UNI. This is Akshay and Vinay. I'll introduce you to them in a moment here. Okay, so what do? We use volunteers to deliver high quality tutoring and mentoring support. I got there eventually, right? Okay, so what we do is we get volunteers, from colleges and universities at tier 1 levels, right? And we give them the ability to tutor a child. So we try and tag them to one child for about 9 months. We do this weekly classes, about 2.5 hours. So this isn't a small term, like one-time engagement. This is at least 30 sessions during the course of 9 months, right? During an academic calendar, And we do this 40 cities across the country, right? So last year we had about 5,000 children and about 4,500 teachers, right? Help with this, volunteers help with this. And we've seen this work. Just last week, we're in the middle of a recruitment campaign because we have to recruit these volunteers as well, right? There's a movement that it takes to get to this point. And so just last week, we were recruiting volunteers and a potential candidate stood up and said, why should I do this? Does this actually work? We had another potential candidate stand up and say, hey, so I used to be a part of one of these orphanages, right? And I got some, I don't know if this works, the pointer work? Yeah, so I got some volunteers who came in. These volunteers were a window to our outside world. And then this person, Pavitra, came back to teach for us. Right? It's a full circle moment for us. Those sort of things are why we do what we do, right? But as we're doing this more than just academic support, there are some key things that break, right? Especially when you scale. Like it works in smaller groups, it really can work. But at scale, sometimes getting the right person in the room is such a challenge, right? It's such an organizational challenge, right? Logistically so. Besides this, also preparing for that child, right? Not only must the teacher know about this child, but they must also know specifically when and what to do what, right? And finally, you've got to capture all this data. So the system feeds itself, so you know what to be preparing for this child, right? Now, this is where it breaks. So we said, okay, for this cohort, what should we do, right? So we said, let's focus on this prepare for a specific child. That's our 80-20, because that'll help us nurture this quality teaching force. To tell you a little bit about what we actually ended up doing, here's Akshay, because we started with this AI coach, right, that would help every volunteer prepare. And we said, hey, this will help us reduce student learning lags, we will have better quality of teaching, and more volunteers will keep showing up, right? So here's Akshay, he's going to tell us exactly what happened.
Thanks, Kiran. So I lead long press.
Yeah. See if that works. Yeah, thanks. Okay, so I lead the program and implementation at UNI. So where Kiran left, right? In order for us to get here, something that we learned very early on in our journey is to keep the user in the center, right, with our volunteers. So what we had to do, considering that this is also not the time when schools function, shelter homes function, because around this time, only July our classes start back, we went with the more synthetic approach to pilot. What we did is we brought our users to us, did a lot of holistic research, did interviews with them, surveys and field visits. We got about 20 experienced pilot users between 1 to 4 years of teaching in our environment. So they've visited the centers, they've been with us for 4 years, done 30 sessions every year. So a lot of experience in that room. And we've used this to build for the real world, right? Something that we learned very early in the first iteration our first hypothesis based on assumptions. Our assumptions are very straightforward, right? Which is because we're teaching children 1:1, because there are 30 repeatable sessions over the period of time, our first assumption was, okay, our volunteers and tutors will really appreciate personalization. So we went ahead and wanted to build a custom lesson plan generator. Right? That's where we saw highest value. We took a napkin version of this, went and did interviews, surveys with our volunteers. Something that we found out very early is that that's not what they wanted at all. The assumptions were right. They did want personalization. They did want all of the things that we listed down. But the form in which they imagined it, the artifact was not a customizable lesson plan. In fact, they thought that's going to restrain them. It's not going to get them to be creative, right? So in our second iteration, what we learned from them is there are 4 major volunteer personas who we were able to identify through this. And each of them had different elements, but ultimately it came down to they appreciated standard lesson plans created by subject matter experts, not by AI, right? But by subject matter experts. But on top of that, they appreciated a prep coach, which is going to personalize this for every student. And this is what they appreciated. So then we did this test with about 20 of them. We logged many events and we mapped behaviors in our ecosystem so they will actually use it. We identified things like when before a class they appreciate this coming in. Because imagine you're a volunteer through the week, you're kind of preparing, right? So when before class they would appreciate it, when after class they would want to log about it. So we understood a lot of these different things, which led us to a very clean insight during this pilot, which kept coming back to us, which is that they initially this bot was only customizing based on our curriculum, which we have built in-house for after-school education, our foundation literacy program. It was basing off of this, but they also wanted to add information about the student, right? Where it knows every single child. So they're able to talk about the student with the bot. So it went through these different iterations, and this is where we were at the end of 3 to 4 months, right? So every pivot came from a volunteer user. How does this look like right now? For us, the key insight is weekly impact dosage that goes across every week through the year, through the volunteer. Right? For this, the first place is to actually confirm that the volunteer comes, right? So the RSVP also happens. The second part, which is the lesson plan preparation part. So I also used to teach as a volunteer a few years back. So when I used to do it, I took about 2 hours to prepare every week, right? Which is a lot of friction. See, actually focusing on the student and the lesson was only about 40 to 50 minutes. But where I went for lesson plan, what I used to do, how to really narrow down on what I need to teach and think about so many different things create a lot of friction, which I used to sometimes just put off during heavy weeks, right? So we wanted to solve that problem, which is what we've done over here, right? And the plan actually arrives over here. I'll talk a little bit more about it later. And then after this, towards the end, post the class, we're logging about the student. So every volunteer is logging in saying for their child, what they taught, how the child was in the class, did they learn, and they also get to attach a note saying observations from the class. This gets fed back into the system. So the system actively learns more about the student and uses it, right? So we'll get into how this actually works in real life. So remember that this whole thing lives inside WhatsApp because that's where our users are mainly, and this is a RAG-based system, right? So I'm going into a classroom as a volunteer. Imagine I'm in the middle of the week, and this message pops up. Asks me, hey, are you showing up to class? Can you pick a student, right? So I'm picking a student, which is my student, and here's something that I think we should note down here, right? For a second. Yeah. Can you just take it to that?
Wow.
You can come out actually, it's not. Yeah. So something that you would notice over here is that when the volunteer gets this message, right, the bot also tells them, hey, you're going to teach Arav this class, and this is where like if you look at it, it's going to say, hey, this is Arav. Arav works comfortably from their level, responds well for these things, right? Watch out for challenges in this regard, right? And then it sends them a lesson plan. Pause it, okay? Yeah. And then it sends them a lesson plan, right? Something to note over here is that this lesson plan is something that we showed very early on in our journey, right? So now the bot has told me about Arav because I'm teaching Arav. I also know about this. This is based on my insights. So it's kicking me off into thinking about the class. Immediately puts me in that mindset, right? After that, it's giving me the lesson plan. In this lesson plan, it's again designed very specifically about where the lesson plan should come, how it's designed, what the look and feel. Right? We gave different versions when we did our interviews and found out this is the one that most people preferred. Hour-wise split, different concepts that are gotten in, and this we've designed. Right? This exists in the backend. This gets received by the volunteer. I'm going to play it. Right? And then after that, I get to prepare and ask up to 5 questions about this lesson plan itself. Right? I can interact to the bot. Right? Now here you'll notice different types of questions. I can ask it a question about the lesson plan itself. Hey, this is something I want to teach within the lesson plan. How do I start this activity for the student? Knowing the lesson plan will give me exactly, hey, these are some things to keep in mind, and start from there, right? And then I can also ask it questions like about the student. Hey, he races fast. Can I do something about it, right? How do I keep him stretched? I can also ask about the classroom. If I'm teaching 2 to 3 different children, I can say there's a little bit of chatter when I teach, and the child is getting distracted when I teach my child. What do I do over here, right? So it is referencing through different kinds of information and arriving over here, right? And the other thing that we really noticed during our initial tests is our volunteers also end up substituting a lot of times in classroom, right? Which really did not come to our mind when we first started building it out. So now there is an additional feature that also allows me to pick other students, right? And then prepare for them. Ultimately, I'm done with all of my lesson plan prepping. I finish the classroom, I can come back, and then I get to log in about the student, like what they've learned, whether the student was present or absent, what I could cover in the classroom today, how the child was, what observations I got to make, and this logged in data feeds back into the system, right? Now, this is how our class functions. Through this, what we're able to ensure is the system knows the student, the system knows the information about the curriculum, it references 4 different types of information that we have fed into it. It uses all of this plus general knowledge to give me very specific knowledge about every single child and guide me towards preparing for this, right? How does this all fit into the larger picture? I'll let Kiran close on that.
Thanks, Akshay. Okay, so this sits into our existing workflows. There's nothing really disruptive here, right? So what we'll be doing is we'll be running a real-world pilot, right? We just mentioned that we didn't have students in class, so we kick off in July. We will be doing as much control testing as we possibly can. We will run it with about 200 volunteer users, yeah? And then our goal is to measure and strengthen, right? During the course of this next academic year, to focus on bringing out some features that we can actually use and try and test that, right? Try and keep on validating what we're bringing out here. Finally, of course, by the next academic year, we want what we're calling full stack change management. It's cool tech, yeah, but it's only as good as the people that adopt it. So we want to be able to crack that adoption, right? How do we get people to actually adopt this tool? And of course, we want to deploy with our 7,000 volunteer users that year, yeah? But this sits into a larger vision for AI and tech in general that we have here at UNI, right? Now, we believe that we can create high impact, highly personalized volunteer tutoring and close those lags a lot faster, right? We need that sort of intervention here as a country, right? We want to hit 500,000 prepared sessions, right? As quickly as possible every year, right? And keep scaling that number. We're a volunteer organization. That's a big part of our bread and butter. We want to bring some of these frameworks and how we marry tech and volunteering and apply it to larger parts of the sector rather than just education. That's our bread and butter. We're excited to be doing this. Thank you so much for the opportunity. We'd love to have your questions. Please address them all to Vinay.